Somebody has to. Anybody else? I'm not going to ask Ted because we always ask Ted. He does a good job. Ari? Ari's over there.
Tom, can we ask you? Tom Wan, the guy in the white t-shirt looking back. Just high level, just high level. Iker has this auto minute thing happening, so if you just get the high level, we can fill it in after.
Notes at the last session in Zurich. Just use Iker's tool, it works great. Thanks for volunteering, David.
Kevin, are you volunteering to?
Kevin volunteered at one point in the past.
He did, yeah, he did.
Leif could do it. All right. It's 4:01, so we'll get started, but we're going to get back to this really soon. This is AI Preferences, our second session. This is the note well. Hopefully by this part of the week, you're familiar with this slide, although it is new in this meeting. These are the policies under which we participate, including professional behavior. We expect people to be respectful in how they treat other people. And if you have any concerns or problems, please contact us or IETF leadership like your area director or the Ombuds team. There's lots of resources to help you if there are issues. Likewise, you need to be aware of the intellectual property commitments you've made by participating in the IETF, especially regarding patents. We do follow the Internet Standards process. And this session is being recorded, and it will be shared publicly. So all these things can be found if you search in your favorite internet search engine for IETF Note Well. Since we talk about the nature of search here, I guess you could also put it into a chat bot. You may get a different answer, though. And there's that, which we want to emphasize once again. And here we are. We need a scribe. Ecker's tool is still beta. Where'd Ecker go? Oh, there he is. He's right there.
Thank you.
Chris, thank you very much. You are a kind, kind person. So on Monday, we talked about 3 of the 4 horsemen of AI preferences. We've got one left today, which is the automated processing. We anticipate that we're going to spend the bulk of our time today just talking about that. If we happen to run out of things to talk about, I guess we could talk about attachment after that. But tentatively, we're probably going to spend 45 or 50 minutes talking about automated processing, and then we want to talk about next steps, kind of upcoming meetings, that sort of thing. Any agenda bashing? Sound good? Everybody seems really excited about that. Let's go. So in Zurich, if I can get it up here, we talked about automated processing, and we came up with a list of things on the whiteboard, which may or may not be visible there. Let's see if we can make that bigger, maybe. I don't know. Yeah, that's not helping really, is it? Nope, not helping at all. Okay. And so we're talking about, different motivations for and against having a top level term, which currently in the draft is called automated processing. And there's been some discussion on list since then about the nature of this term and refining its semantics. We've got several folks who are, I think maybe earlier briefly we talked about this dichotomy between, some people are concerned about the unintended consequences, and other people are concerned that they need something like this so that they can prevent unanticipated uses. And so that's very much a trade-off that we need to talk about. So I think we'll just open the floor, and if folks want to talk more about their concerns on both sides of this and how we might make some substantial progress to deciding whether or not we have a top-level term and what it might look like. So I see Lila in queue.
Go ahead, Lila.
Hello, everyone. It's Leela Bailey, actually, internet.
So sorry.
That's okay. So I've talked a ton on List, and I don't want to overly go into depth about the things I've raised there, just that like it's outside the charter and it'll be confusing in the robots.txt context. Like I've said those things, I'm not going to repeat them, but I still believe them. Today, I want to focus on something that I just managed to wrap my head around since our last meeting. Thank you to Leonard and Sebastian, who both pointed me to specific standards outside the robots.txt context that this vocabulary is going to be imported into, including PDFs and EPUBs and basically digital file formats that are not even on the web. So this category now in my mind is even bigger and broader and sweeps in even more kinds of uses than even I was imagining. So the thing I want to hammer on is the category appears to sweep in a wide range of socially beneficial, non-commercial, private, personal uses that are not even AI, right? Like way outside all of that. And I want to focus specifically on accessibility and accessibility tools, just for the purpose of like making this point. So accessibility tools, many of them use something like automated processing as we're defining it here, accessibility checkers that scan a file for accessibility issues, assistive technologies like screen readers, text-to-speech programs, captioning, transcription technologies, alt text generator for describing images. And then many people also use general purpose tools for accessibility purposes, right? So I would really love to hear from the authors or the chairs or anybody else who really feels like they are in favor of such a broad sweeping category, whether they agree with me, whether they think these tools and uses would be swept in. So like question one. And then two, I'd like to hear, is there a response to that that is better than just, these are just preferences that you can ignore, right? Because we have section 3.2. I appreciate that that's there. I wrote most of it, and so I appreciate that it is there. But all it really says is you can sometimes ignore this standard, and that gives me cold comfort. I have to say, like that, I don't think that's enough of an answer, right? Like people can have all kinds of preferences, and sometimes those preferences can have discriminatory impacts. As a society, we have already rejected the idea that copyright holders can prevent the creation and use of accessible formats and tools, right? We have the Marrakesh Treaty that was fought over for decades with publishers saying, we have a right to prevent these kinds of tools and uses. We don't have to provide them, and we can prevent these uses. And as a broad society, we have rejected that. So I'm really worried if the only answer to people making those kinds of tools and uses is too bad you can't follow our standard, that it really undermines the idea of building a standard that's going to be widespread and widely adopted, that like good guys and good actors, people who want to be sort of viewed as being a good actor in the digital space, that if they cannot follow this standard, then I think we are doing something wrong. So I will leave it there. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks,
Thank you.
Leela.
Ted.
Ted Hardy. I think there was a lot that Leela went through there that I think the document tries to address very specifically, and I think there are some other things the document could do to perhaps address those slightly more directly. But I think that part of the issue that we're facing here is because we're looking at this in terms of a hierarchy. And I think we inherit that from one of our attachment methods. There's a sense in how robots.txt works that you can do something like, I'm going to give a blanket no to all crawlers and then accept certain crawlers from that blanket no. And that hierarchy creates a capability to allow you to deal with unknown crawlers. And I think what we're trying to do here is actually to say that there is a category of unknown uses, but that it is not terribly helpful to our view of this thing to make that set of unknown uses the top of a hierarchy. that having a separate declaration relevant to unknown uses that is not the top of the hierarchy would, in fact, in my opinion, slightly better fit the current situation. Because what we're trying to do is find ways for people to express their preferences about how a particular asset or content or piece of work can be used. And as long as we're talking about them in a series of parallels, then I think we can find ways of saying assistive technology is a category at that hierarchy level, or at that base level, if we want to do that to handle Leela's objection. But we can also say, look, if I don't know, here's what I want you to do. If it's not in any of these categories, here's what I want you to do. And it very well may be that people will make either the choice to say yep or nope, depending on whether they feel like the other set of categories have in fact answered their concerns. Because if what they're really concerned about is, look, I really don't want substitutive AI systems to be able to train on my work because they will then substitute their work for my own. As long as that's a category, the fact that unknown is out there may be comfortable for them to say, yeah, I'm going to leave it unknown as okay until I have evidence that there's something in that that is problematic for me, and at which point I'll revisit.
So, Ted, like, quick follow-up question to you, digging a little bit deeper. If this unknown users category is not stated, what would people assume when they're consuming this? So somebody did not make a unknown users declaration, right? What would be the reasonable default for that? Because I think that's like, you're getting into the right problem, right? Like, but the solution might be harder because, like, if it's not there, what do people do? Because that's kind of what the tension is about in this.
So I think that goes to the decision-making of the person reading the preference. No preference has been expressed, at which point they have to use their best judgment about whether or not in that condition, in the light of other things they know, which may include jurisdictional defaults, whether or not it is permitted or not.
Yep.
But it is exactly a null response. It is not a yes, it is not a no by default. It is, there is no data here. No preference has been expressed.
Yeah.
And I think maybe if we start asking ourselves whether we need this hierarchy, we might be able to kind of get past this issue and maybe not. Let's see.
So Ted, so if I interpret correctly, you're saying you remove the hierarchy, but you still have an unknown
Right.
preference.
It is a permitted thing to express a preference for uses which are unknown to the person expressing the preference.
Right.
And what they put there is either they fail to include it at all. They can put a
Just
yes,
like any
this
other
is
preference.
permitted. No, this is not permitted. But it is not reflective of understanding what those unknown uses are related to AI, related to text and data mining, related to AI output or foundation models. It is simply, I don't know what this is.
Right.
And the relationship to any of the others is not stated.
Right. Does that imply that we would need a separate preference for things like assistive technology? Is that the direction that you're trying to go there?
I don't know that we do, but I also don't think it's harmful in that situation if we add one, because it's not part of a hierarchy. We're not trying to say assistive technology is above or below anything else. We're simply saying it's something somebody might wish to express a preference about, and we're going to permit it. And I honestly think that I don't have the same concerns Leela does, but I don't wish to argue that she shouldn't have them. I believe assistive technologies and other things are protected in other ways.
Right.
And I think perhaps simply adding to the document that is all protected so somebody reading the standard is aware of it. But I also have no particular objection to reinforcing that in the document if that helps us move toward consensus.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. That's helpful. Timid Robot.
Hello, I'm Timid Robot. I'll work backwards. First, I'm concerned that if we remove the hierarchy, we do not remove the problem of unintended consequences. We would have to kind of anticipate all of the unintended uses and create categories for them in order for them not to be part of the I don't know category. Second, I'm really curious if Leela could talk about whether reducing the scope of that top level category, such as I've proposed multiple times on the mailing list and is documented on GitHub, would allay Leela's concerns enough to move forward. Thank you.
May I respond quickly? So I think a lot of my concerns trickle down, if you will, into some of the other categories as they stand right now. So as we currently have them, my concerns are not allayed, but I will say I believe I sort of +1'd your idea of figuring out a way to narrow that top level category and at least constrain it to something in the AI space, because at least that's within our charter. So that would address the sort of scope of the charter concern I've been raising. But a lot of people use AI tools for accessibility purposes too, and I really worry about giving this veto power again, not even just to people with that have intellectual property rights or copyrights, but to just anybody that's hosting content or hosting a website or publishing something in a PDF or an EPUB, regardless of whether or not they hold any sort of intellectual property rights in that. It seems like a very, very expansive veto power over a lot of just personal freedom things that like I expect to be able to do with a physical book, for example. Like there are a lot of things that I can do with a physical book that this feels like it's telling me I'm not allowed to do because technology is involved. And I think that that's a real problem. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Leela. And Timmy Robot, I'm going to post a link to your comment on the GitHub on the list in case somebody hasn't followed it before, because it's a lot of stuff happening. So,
Meredith.
Hi, all. Sorry for the very intense lighting, so I'm sort of in the dark. I did want to say one thing, I think perhaps in response to a couple of comments earlier that frame this as a question of what AI tool developers need and what publishers and content creators want, because I think that leaves out what is in fact the largest interest here, which is the interest of users and the public in an internet that enables research, free expression, that enables them to have equitable access to information. And so I think it's worrying to me here that we don't have groups focused on disability rights in this conversation. I think that's part of our work, is to bring those folks in. But I think that framing this as a sort of, that if we satisfy the interests of technology companies building AI tools, and that if we satisfy the interests of content creators, that we have done the work, misses out that in many situations, what is expedient for technology companies and what is valuable for content creators misses what is in fact useful for the public. And I think we see this in ways that users relying on limitations to exceptions to copyright have been left out of being able to post material online because of systems like Content ID. And that might be a good bargain for the tech company because it limits their liability, and a good bargain for the content companies because it protects their IP. But it's a bad bargain for freedom of speech and for free inquiry. And I worry about that getting replicated here. Not that people have to follow these preferences, but if technology companies do, then users who may have a legitimate sort of different purpose under 3.2 for accessibility or research, to the extent they're using these general purpose tools, they can't do these things. The other thing I would say is there are some preferences which we should not enshrine in the standard because they are not socially beneficial preferences, right? Like, I don't actually think it's a useful thing for this to do, to say, I don't care, I'm going to opt out of having accessibility as one way people can use the site. I think similarly, you shouldn't be able to opt out of certain types of research or critique. And so I think that fundamentally,
I don't know.
there are certain things that if we make them opt-in, opt-out, that legitimizes those as this ability to sort of take back from what is in the sort of socially beneficial domain. It's sort of the opposite of universal design. We want to start from this place of openness and only take the least out, instead of saying, no, you'll have to build a very specific one-off tool if you want to rely on these exceptions for accessibility. So I think that feels a little bit backwards to me in the approach here.
Okay. Martin.
Yeah, Ted's also wrong on chat. So, yes, yeah, he has finally achieved consistency. So no, that was not what I got up here to say. Lil asked a question. I think it's a reasonable one. I think in drafting this top level category, we've had a pretty serious challenge. It's been very difficult for us to come up with a definition, and it's quite clear to me that the definition in my head doesn't match the one that Leela had there. I think a lot of those things that Leela described, I would categorize as processing, but not necessarily automated processing. And that is, I think, a difficult distinction to make, and I'll try to articulate why I think that distinction is important. In a private discussion, I sort of floated the idea of processing that happens for a human or a single human user, and using that as the sort of the razor to separate between what is automated and what is not. And that may be one way to think about this. And then in all of those cases where you have accessibility tools, that's largely going to be directly connected with a human. Now, that doesn't capture everything. I understand that. But again, this may be one of those situations where the definition is still, because we're pulling from legislation and the legislation doesn't understand the context as well as we do now, we probably need different text. And we need to be a lot more articulate about what this means. And we've had a reluctance to work on the text because we've all been fighting about whether it should exist or not. And I think that's, I mean, it's fair. We should be fighting about whether it exists or not, but there's been no real attempt to improve the text over the time. And part of that fault is mine. But ultimately, I'm a slave to the working group. As far as as that goes, I can only do the things that the working group allows me to do in the document in that respect. So, sure. So I think if we try to think of different ways of framing this, and I know Tim and Robot suggested connecting this to AI. We've had a bunch of different suggestions. I'm looking for constructive suggestions around how this could be improved, as opposed to just, it's a bad idea and it'll have these unintended consequences. And because I have a microphone and because Ted's wrong, I thought I'd articulate why. So unknown, the problem with unknown is that it is unknown what is unknown to you. It is unknown to me what is unknown to you. I don't know what you think unknown means. And yeah, and so Ted's response there was uncategorized. And of course, the set of categories the set of things that we do categorize over time, I expect will change because our understanding now is imperfect. We understand that. And quite likely we'll add more categories in the future. And I think for people who say no to uncategorized stuff, they might be surprised to learn that in the future might mean that it doesn't capture something that then subsequently gets categorized. I think that would be an unfortunate outcome for having one of those sorts of things, and that's why the structure is as it has been proposed. But I'm not sure that we have a clean solution there either. So I think the whole question of hierarchy versus not is really not a useful avenue. I'd rather concentrate on whether we can improve the definition and try to find angles on this that would be constructive.
Bradley.
Thanks. So a few points. I think that there's a strong element here of if this group doesn't define this category, then another group certainly will, or there is an extremely strong um, uh, there's extremely strong pressure on publishers and web operators to use a category like this, given the existence of text and data mining exceptions and opt-outs. Now, this is all bearing in mind that we're not trying to further a legal effect or plug into that, but this is the only category for which the policymakers are frankly ahead of where this group has started. And so in some ways, maybe it's something that we can leave for the end, because it may depend on how well we define the other categories in order to figure out if the other categories are sufficient enough so that a all-encompassing category is perhaps rendered moot. But to me, it seems like some of the points that Martin had made in his blog post, and I think that had also been expressed in today's meeting and elsewhere, that if it's just because this is extremely broad doesn't mean that we should say that nobody can express this preference. I'm a bit concerned about the use of the word veto power on the one hand, and then saying, yes, I know we have 3.2, but that's not good enough. I don't think that that's super helpful to call something veto power when we all know extremely well that that this is very far from that. Because I think it also implies that there is an intention on the part of those exercising this category to prevent users that I don't know if there would be anyone in this room or virtually or physically that would object to those types of activities taking place. And so I think there should be an acknowledgement that publishers too have an interest in wanting to ensure accessibility to their content in various ways, and that nobody has an intention to prevent those kinds of socially beneficial uses, and we do have user interests in mind. And then the last thing I want to say also is that one of the strong reasons for needing this is that we're not operating in a world where there is visibility into the identity of crawlers, the purpose of crawlers. And so there is a strong basis on which to say, if you're not going to tell me what you're there for and who you are, then let me tell you what I might want or not want you to do with my content. If this was in a different environment where there was greater visibility into the identity of crawlers, the purpose of crawlers, then I think we probably would not be having such difficulty with this category today, because we wouldn't need it. We wouldn't need to say proactively to the world of crawlers, we want you to know what we want you to do or not do with our content, because you're not saying what you're there to do.
Hey, Alyssa.
I love this working group because it gives me an opportunity to think about AIPREF, which was the first working group that I ever participated in a very long time ago, as did a few other people. That guy. There's a common thread here. Yeah, what are you doing that's helpful?
Wow.
You were very helpful in AIPREF, actually. So what happened there is that there were these like super specific preferences that we tried to define. None of this ever really got expressed on the internet because people didn't deploy the standards. But we had a lot of the conversations. Like the conversation is exactly the same. Like the things that we're not defining, what will people do? And it turns out that like if you don't define the thing in the document, people do whatever they want with the things that you don't define. Like there are no words that you can put into this document that will change that reality. And that is also true for section 3.2, although I am glad section 3.2 is there. But there's no like conformance test for section 3.2. It's sort of like, we're just telling you that this is how the world is. And I think this falls into that category as well. So this whole like unknown, uncategorized thing is like it doesn't comport with how systems actually process these things. Like people are going to read this document, they're going to be like, oh, these are the 3 things that you can express. And if something isn't in there, there's not going to be some implicit expression of it. I don't really understand the value of this category myself. That's why I was asking for the pro-con table to come back. Because getting back to the conversation we had the other day, we, I think, really need to think about like the use cases in which some set of real people or entities actually would express this, and why, and what their motivation is. And thank you. That's nice. So now I get to now have to like think about this more, looking back at the image. But I don't know what that use case is in this case that isn't overcome by all of those cons on the other side. So to me, it feels like there's 4 preferences, there's 4 categories in the document right now. If the other 3 could be defined, maybe call it a day.
Yeah, thank you, Alyssa. And for somebody who's not able to follow this, I posted the whiteboard on the material, so you can actually look at a PDF. It's still pretty bad quality because of a reflective whiteboard, but best we can do. Thanks. No, I actually have a different angle into it. I do have a different angle into it.
No, I'm about to have AI transcribe it. No, I'm not joking.
So, it seems to me there are 2 reasons why one might have a category. We should have a category. So, like, first of all, let me take a step back. It's driving me nuts. The structure of the specification right now is ignoring this category for a second. That there are a set of categories that are not this category, and the structure of the specification is if there is some use that does not fit in one of these categories, or is not even, or actually, if there's some use that is not written down in the robots or whatever the heck it is, then you, the consumer of this information, have no information whatsoever about whether it's permitted or not. So if I write search yes, you have no, does that mean you can change the definition model? No idea. There's no way to specify. And so that puts I think Ted was indicating site operators in this situation where they have to specify every category, and well, without a catch-all. If they want to have determinism about what they're saying, yes. Because right now they have non-determinism what they were saying, and the implicit purpose of it seems to me that the implicit purpose of a catch-all is to provide determinism about what the text says. Now we can provide the determinism in a different way. We could say if it isn't listed, it's okay. If it isn't listed, it is okay, and then you would know what that said and what did not say. I think this is me disagreeing with Alyssa, by the way, about like the semantics of these things. But so that's the purpose of having something like that. If people think that is in principle a bad idea, that is one argument. If people think that the specific things that are swept in by this text are bad, that is a different argument. So you might think that in principle it is fine to have a catch-all, but it should like permit accessibility. Then like let's have that discussion. If you think that in principle a catch-all is bad, that's a different discussion. Let's have that discussion. I wanted to like just say one more thing, which is that this discussion, that was a essential discussion after Meredith's comments, also on the chat, about whether you should be able to say things that are like we personally do not approve of, we think are bad policy. Let me point out, you already can say those things because that's what robots lets you do. And what robots lets you do is you can't say like, it's actually grosser. Like robots says like, Googlebot cannot scrape me, but there's no way of saying Googlebot can scrape me for reason X and reason Y. So now you're like in a posture of like looking up what various things do and being like, okay, you just can't do it. But like we're already in the soup of being able to say things which like you may not agree with.
Thanks, Edgar. Ted?
Ted Hardy, I got up originally to say that Martin has not achieved consistency because I think he's absolutely right about some things, and we're still he has not aspired to consistency. So I think he's he's forced me to refine the definition of what uncategorized is further. And I think that refinement is that when you see uncategorized and a preference, what it means is that if it does not appear, what you're doing does not appear in one of the categories that I have already made an expressed preference about, this is what you do. And that gets you some of the way, but not all of the way toward the kind of consistency that Ecker was talking about. It's not actually deterministic because somebody can choose to leave this out. It is not a requirement that you include it. And the set of preferences which they choose to express is not required to be exhaustive compared to the set that are defined. They're simply telling you what their preferences are, and they may care about some things and have no opinion at all about others. And I think that also kind of points back to something that Martin is right about. Because this set of categories will grow and change over time, we have to treat these preferences as something that may also grow and change over time, because as the person maintaining the information that's being associated with this attachment method changes their understanding of what's out there, they may need to change what's in the set of preferences associated with the attachment. And I think that's okay. But that part of the problem we're actually struggling with is I think most of us are trying to see this as something that ends up being a complete expression in one way or another about the set of preferences, because we're looking at it from the point of view of the people who have to process them. And if we're looking at it from the point of view of the people who have to process them, and there isn't an exhaustive set in there, either by the presence of a default or through some geopriv, like we wrote down everything trust us. And I have to apologize one more time to Alyssa, since I was the AD who made her chair of that group. But the reality is people don't have preferences about everything. I absolutely have no preferences on the weight of wool of suits because I don't wear suits. And there are going to be a whole bunch of things that for a particular piece of content, it's totally okay for the person not to express a preference and to leave it up to the people who are encountering the asset with the attached preferences to decide what to do. And I kind of suspect Alyssa is right again, that means they'll do whatever they want, because that's what we're telling them to do. Do whatever you want.
Thanks. Glenn?
So I wanted to cover a couple of points. One, I think we're getting a little bit pulled into on some of the threads, especially on the chat, around this idea that we need to have an exhaustive list because people are going to use it as a mechanism for expressing in detail every possible use case you can use the content for, and that is forever binding. Like Ted said, I think that the uses are going to evolve and change. We're really early into some of this technology space, and it is going to evolve and change in ways that we can't predict. And try to cover it all today or in this iteration a priori is going to be impossible. So I think a solution that allows for it to evolve and change naturally it will end up in the right place. The other point I wanted to raise here is that the act of publishing content along with a policy expression is an indication that the content publisher is wanting their content used in some way. And the people that have fears that this is a mechanism for content owners who say, I don't want my stuff used, I think it's hitting the wrong note, because the act of publishing says, I want my content to be used. This mechanism is a way to create expressions that have a richer set of ways of expressing what kind of uses they want it used for. And then we have this state of, well, if it's not specified, what does that mean to do? That's a point that I think that I still always advocate for opt-in as an option. I think if we land in some place that supports an opt-in or opt-out model, and it's the choice of the publisher to choose which one they want to express, I think that's the right tone to hit. So non-exhaustive list, because we can't do everything a priori, is point number one. Point number two is allow for opt-in, opt-out, allow for that, and to recognize that people, by the act of publishing, are users of the internet. Their use of the internet is to publish these things that they got that they want other people to have access to. Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn. Roberto?
Hey folks, I'm Roberta. I'm a newbie. I'm here. Yeah, so as a newbie, right, I was in other meetings. And one of the things that resonated with AIPREF that I wanted to bring here is that today, this morning, we had the future of internet, right? And one of the yeah, and one of the things that we were speaking over there is exactly that from the point of view of how we dealt with privacy right now, and we dealt with users' rights and everything, the users are almost not being able to choose what they can or cannot provide to, different sources of companies and everything, right? Right now, I'm trying to either go to more practical part of view for this subject or to see more broadly. And like the more technical part of view would be that we haven't still solved some of the issues that we have seen in the past with those kind of options. And I think this is what it's leaking on the subject, right? Because we know, for example, that bots.txt, it's not enforced. We know that there are technology that opt-in, opt-out that was made, but for example, terms of use and those kind of stuff, they don't work when the platform is too important to the user just, choose to not use it. And I think this is kind of one of the things that I would like to point out here is that the user is not a child, right? It should be considered like the user's opinion about the data that it's creating should be a point of view that should be considered, and not just if the provider itself would be dealing with this data. The provider should be, in a way, enforced to to executing in top of the data of the user if the data wants to be used to training or not, for example. And I don't know I don't know where the mismatch with this is. I know that it's really tough to enforce those kind of stuff, and I don't know how to solve it, but
I think there's like something FARS wrote at some point, like,
Yeah.
who owns the data and like who makes a declaration. I think it's like a little bit far out. We have like much more fundamental things to discuss because
Yeah.
of the unknown cases, how things get treated. Yeah. So
Yeah.
thank you. Thanks for the point.
Thank you. Thank you.
Victoria?
I wanted to answer a point or a question that was made earlier about whether we think this is bad in principle or bad because it sweeps up things like accessibility. I think this creating a catch-all is bad in principle because it sweeps up too many positive uses, including accessibility, including uses for expression, and other things that we are probably not even considering because all of the users who use the internet are not in this room. And they have lots of positive uses. That is, I really appreciated Bradley acknowledging, publishers are not trying to limit things like accessibility, and tools that make accessibility easier. That's great, but I think unfortunately the practical effect of this would do that. The fundamental problem with creating a category that covers everything, including everything we can't anticipate, is that necessarily sweeps up unanticipated good uses. We don't have a way, to create a category that's unanticipated good uses or versus good unanticipated bad uses, or vice versa, right? I think that's really important to recognize. And Lila, and Meredith can come up with all kinds of examples of those positive uses for us to talk about, but I think the reality is that there's too many that will be swept up for us to even do that. There's too many uses that we should protect, and we, if the effect of what we're doing is to create a tool that limits those kinds of things, including things that publishers don't even want to limit, then I don't think we should be doing it, because the effect of that is harmful for users And then the last point I wanted to emphasize was something Meredith brought up earlier, which is that our work really needs to prioritize users. And I understand that creating a preference signal like this in a top level category to express it may be useful for publishers and website operators potentially, or any other companies, but I think what needs to be paramount is the interest of the users.
Right. So, Victoria, before you go, I'm hearing both from you and from Leela and others a fair number of times, this appeal to the effects, and I think that's pretty well established. The concerns there, we've talked about it pretty much since the working group opened. What I'd encourage you to do when you bring these up is to not just appeal to the effects, but also talk about the mechanism that you think will cause that. In that, we say again, and again, that these are just preferences. And then we've heard, the response that, oh, you can't just say that. What are the mechanisms? And this has come out a little bit, but I'd like to dig a little bit more. I've heard that there's the legal effects and the counterbalance there that we sometimes hear from people is yes, but there are exceptions in the law. And then we've heard a couple of times that some implementers may react conservatively and say, oh, well, we see these preferences expressed, and therefore we're going to not allow, for example, excessive technology to operate on that data because we're afraid that we might get prosecuted for that or so forth. So not necessarily right now, but now if you like, just if we can dig into those cases, that might help us move past this discussion. Because I don't think anybody's saying, oh no, we're not worried about effect on assistive technologies. It's just the question is what are the mechanisms and how can we address that?
Okay, can I respond?
Please. Yeah.
I think that there are several mechanisms, but the one that I think is the most agreed upon, at least among the lawyers I've talked to, is the legally binding effect that this would have under EU law. And I understand that there are exceptions to that law, but they're not the kinds of freewheeling exceptions for good uses that I think maybe US lawyers are thinking, or people who live in the US are thinking of, because we have a fair use category that is almost it is case by case, it's fact specific. And if something's a good use, it doesn't get covered under IP, for example.
Right.
But that's not the case in the EU.
Okay. I'm going to let Paul Keller jump queue because I know he has context on this. And also, I'm sorry, we'll get there. I want to be very careful because I'm acutely aware that we are not authoritative to interpret EU law in this group, and I get nervous when we do that. Oh, yeah. Oh, fair enough. Paul, if you can briefly respond to that.
Yes, I would encourage any lawyers that you have talked to point to actual EU law that has any effect on this. To my knowledge, there is none. I've pointed that out on the mailing list in response to something Aaron posted, I think 3 days ago. And there is at the moment no EU law that directly references any of this work.
I'm sorry, that's just not true.
Okay.
We have had this discussion on the mailing list, so I encourage people to read that. By the way, I'm Erin Simon. And we operate in the real world, not the theoretical world. And I think we have to take seriously the consequences that this work will have in the real world. And in that world, the European Commission will absolutely treat what standards emerge from this process as binding if they are an extension of the robots.txt protocol, and if the IETF can demonstrate that they are feasible and implementable. And it is true that it will do that through the vehicle of the Code of Practice of the AI Act instead of through the literal text of the AI Act, but that doesn't make it any less likely to happen. And it is, I put this on the chat, but it is unacceptably naive to say that all we are doing is allowing sites to express preferences that crawler operators or AI companies or anybody else is simply free to ignore. That is not how it will work in practice. And it is a derogation of our responsibility to come up with the right scope for these rules to say, well, we don't have to get it right because people will just ignore whatever we do. Now, a standard does
briefly
not.
respond?
No, I'm still talking. A standard does not have to govern every possible use of a piece of content. And in fact, it should not. The law has never allowed a rights holder to govern every possible use of a piece of content. And robots.txt, the foundational thing that we're working to build on here, applies to crawlers and not users and not a variety of things. And so I think we should be really interrogating whether we need a category that fundamentally amounts to every possible use in any possible way of this piece of content, because we have not narrowed down the things that this vocabulary or the attachment mechanism will not cover. And so it does make it dangerous for exactly the reasons that Leela and Tori and many other people have been articulating.
So Erin, can I just state one thing just to make sure other people also get it? So there's text in there. It says because of enforcement is not provided by the specification, the consequences of ignoring preferences could vary depending on how the legal jurisdiction recognizes preferences, right? I think it cannot be clearer than that. That it's not saying hey, please ignore your thing, but this has to be interpreted inside a legal jurisdiction. It's something we state. If you think that text could use stuff, I understand everything you say, that it's incredibly naive to not do that, but we don't have the enforcement privilege here, right? At the IETF. So everything you say makes sense,
yes,
but there is nothing we can do about what the EU law will or will not do.
But there is something we can do about crafting a category that is too broad to be fit for purpose.
No, that's a fair thing for you to state, and there is pros and cons. They are straight up there, and that is one of them, for sure.
Right. So I think Paul wanted to respond.
Yeah, I don't think we can reasonably disagree about sort of what we think will happen in the future, what's realistic. I don't think either of us can predict how EU law will evolve. At the current state, there is no EU law that makes any of this mandatory.
Right. So I would much appreciate it if we could avoid talking about the sole legal effects as our reason for doing things here. Talking about it's too broad, talking about the effects of what we do on the real world is great, but we are not legitimate to set EU law in this room, and neither should we.
We are also not operating in a context where that is not a factor. And so, granted, Paul and I can disagree about how EU law will be applied, and time will bear one of us out. But I think we can
don't disagree about how the law will be applied.
Paul, please don't speak over her.
Thank you. But I think we all agree that there are categories that it would be inappropriate to define. For example, I put in the chat a category, a preference statement that says, you are not allowed to use my work if you disagree with me.
Right.
And so I think we should work from that shared understanding that some categories are not only not useful, but actively harmful in thinking about what activities we really want in scope of these preferences. And that is all.
That's a productive way to forward, I think, yes.
Thank you.
And I can agree with that last part.
Okay, Paul, we need to keep to the queue now, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you. Please keep your comments short. We need a couple of minutes to talk about summary and next steps. So please go ahead. Timid Robot?
Briefly.
Hello, I'm Timid Robot. I find the kind of the cost arguments and this cost benefit analysis compelling. And I was wondering if maybe Martin could talk about the possibility of adding the top level category in subsequent subsequent versions. I understand that that's not conceptually elegant or beautiful, but I'm not convinced that it's practically impossible.
Okay, thank you, Timid Robot.
Meredith, briefly.
Sorry. I just want to say, I think we talk a lot here about a very technologically sophisticated type of user. But in fact, and this is just a general thing, is that most users with disabilities are going to be using general purpose commercial tools to do the things that they do to make materials accessible. And so to the extent that we don't push to have those uses preserved, they're not going to be swept out because of any bad intent or anyone intentionally excluding those uses. But if there's an incentive to comply with the preferences and there's not an incentive to also enable those accessible uses, they will just be lost out of sort of commercial necessity. And I think particularly because those user voices aren't at the table, we do need to talk about them when we think about how we craft the preferences and what impacts they will have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Meredith. Paul? Paul, go ahead.
Okay, move on.
Okay. Thanks, Paul. Nate, you have the last word.
Yeah, I just want to say I appreciate everyone's contributions here, and it's really interesting to see this. I think the reason why we have to assume that when we're thinking about unknown bad and good use cases, that there may be actors who may bundle those together. The reason why we're here today, or why I'm here, is because there are other companies that don't allow for us to specify. They don't tell us, they don't break out their crawlers. They don't let us specify that our content can be used for search, but not for AI summary products. And that is basically a bundling, a tying where the defaults are working to those who are incumbent. And I just really worry that all of this, like by not having ability to express more granular preferences, the net effect is to benefit incumbents.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Nate. So that was a conversation. It's pretty clear we are not near consensus on that term. When we went back and looked at the discussion from Monday, the feeling that we had was that the training term, what's now the foundation model term, seems like it's a promising candidate for continued discussion. We still need, obviously, to continue to tweak that, but that seems good. The search term seems to be in approximately the same state, although maybe not quite as advanced. So that's, again, promising for continued work. The AI output term seems to need substantially more discussion, and the text that's in the draft right now seems like it's more of a distraction than the basis of further work. So I think what we're going to do is talk to the editors and probably pull that text out for now. That doesn't mean that we're not going to continue to discuss that and work on refining that, or perhaps get other candidates for something to fill that conceptual slot. But we don't want it to be a distraction for the further work. This last term, the top level term, I think is more in that latter state than in the former state. It's pretty clear we're going to have a tough time getting to consensus on that. So I think probably we're going to pull that one out for now as well. And we're going to ask for people to think about what can fill that function in a way that can gain consensus, make some proposals, but keeping in mind that we need consensus to ship anything in this group. And so that's the barrier we have to get to. We'll continue those discussions. Going forward, we're talking about holding an interim online meeting in December, perhaps one or even two, so we can continue these discussions. And then having another hybrid face-to-face meeting, as we discussed on list, in either late January or early February. We've had a few offers for hosts, both in the United States and in Canada. So please, as we asked on the list, get back to us, to the chairs, if you have concerns about those locations or preferences, because we're going to be making decisions about that and advertising that pretty soon. Anything else?
Yeah. Also, for all the stuff we talked about, we'll start a consensus check on the list afterwards, like just to make sure that we are aligned. So in case people didn't participate today, to make sure, like, if you like, just talk about like what we're going to put in for the first two categories, right? Just say like, hey, we feel like we have some way of going forward with this. So just put it down on the list, like make sure we summarize so people who are not able to participate because of time zones or anything can kind of have their say on it after. Right. Right. And thank you very much for everyone who offered a host, and thanks to everybody who sent us your concerns, and thanks to everybody who expressed opinion. So like we are all better for it. So thank you very much, and be great. Thank you.
Thanks. So we have to be careful not to call those consensus calls in those items. I don't think we're ready for consensus calls in this one. But yeah, just go. But I mean, just taking those two out is really just an editorial task at this point. It's not. We're not saying that we don't have consensus and they're not going to be in there. It's just
We're taking the default.
we want to focus up.
You're talking to the right person. Yeah. What would you prefer happen?
Sorry?
No, it's yes.
Oh, I know. I know. Yeah, that comes.